Tech, the weekly extended chat where we discuss the last week of news and break down what we learned in this news cycle about local newspaper publishers and what can be applied to the publishers we work with at our hometown. So joining us today from the Our Hometown Publisher Support Team, we have Terry, Vera, and Tyler. Welcome, everyone. All right, so then, the A/B testing one, actually, I kind of had at the top of my list because I had a specific comment on this. So let's hear this one.
Optimizing your headlines with A/B testing. This episode of Today in News Tech is made possible with audio articles by ourhometown.com. Today, we're highlighting a piece by Nick Hagar and Nick Diakopoulos over at Nieman Lab about the efforts newsrooms have taken to draw readers to their headlines. The article, How A/B Testing Can and Can't Improve Your Headline Writing, discusses the ways reporters have tried to analyze the effectiveness of various headline writing strategies. Analyzing various headline approaches through A/B testing can provide great insights into what readers are looking for, but they don't tell the whole story. Generalizing headline test data is a common practice, but A/B tests are meant to optimize for specific cases, said Hagar and Diakopoulos. Here are a few of our big takeaways. The study published in Digital Journal analyzed headline strategies like positive/negative, attention-grabbing language, and key phrases like "this is why" or "here's how" across 141,000 headlines on 293 websites. The surprising takeaway of the study showed that no single strategy had repeatable successful results, meaning general headline styles aren't guaranteed to succeed. It is important to note that A/B testing is still very effective when used in specific contexts, and it is recommended to test headlines when publishing key stories. While these strategies don't give newsrooms insight that will work across the board, they can still help reporters to boost traffic on your bigger stories. Because of this, Our Hometown provides the opportunity to conduct A/B tests natively within our custom WordPress platform.
Thanks for watching Today in News Tech, the pod. Perfect. Okay. Let me see here. I'm going to just, for some reason I can't share. Can you allow me to I'm trying to just share my camera here. I'm just going to reclaim host real quick and give it back to you. So what's the feedback on that? A/B testing is important, but they couldn't come up with any rules to follow, for writing good headlines based on it. It's just a case-by-case thing that can benefit each headline, but they couldn't pull any kind of strategy out of it. I thought that was interesting because they kind of went into this study, I would imagine, thinking A/B testing is important. We know that. Let's try to figure out how we can write better headlines before even testing them, basically, right? They were trying to come up with a strategy for writing better headlines, and they basically concluded every headline's different. You just got to test them all and see what the audience reaction is.
That's how I understood it. And I took the main conclusion as being like A/B testing, which I couldn't find a good way to concisely put this. It's in the actual article. But the way they phrased it was A/B testing works within a window. So if you have a big story that you think will have a long tail, that's your opportunity to A/B test the headline right as you publish. That way you can course correct as you go.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's something that you just have to do for every story, and you want to do it early so that the benefit of the better headline, you want to quickly detect which one is getting more clicks. So I guess this is a technical question for Terry and Vera. How could we do this on our platform? Maybe we could look at ways to automate this, but one simple way you could do is just change the headline halfway through the day and just look at the first day's results. It's not really true A/B testing. It'd be better if you could constantly be testing it. We do have A/B testing tools that maybe we could apply to headlines. Do you guys know of any way that it could be done with the tools that you train people with now?
You could look in Matimo and look at what stories are popular, and then maybe those that aren't getting the exposure, you can rename them and see if they do any better.
For sure. Yeah, that type of thing is not going to hurt to try. But yeah, I'm just thinking what can we tell publishers? What's the easiest way for them to actually apply this? And I think it's going to have to be some type of an automated tool, the A/B testing as applied to different features that we've recently come up with, for the related stories. So if we could apply that just to the H1 block, basically the headline, of every story. Then we're testing real time. But the other way that I thought we could do it is with the newsletter, actually. I think that would be most effective. If you just had one story, you create 2 newsletter lists. You split your whole newsletter into 2 A/B groups and then just send it out at the same time, see which one gets more clicks, and then just update the headline on the website to match that.
Yeah, we've actually done that with one paper, not very recently, but
right.
Year. It's a bilingual paper, and we set up 2 groups where we had sent one headline in English and one headline in Spanish. Believe it or not, the results were almost even. The same headline,
right.
But one was in English and one was in Spanish. And even though the paper is really focused to the Spanish community, Spanish-speaking community, the opens and the click rates were almost identical.
The click rate, the percentage, not the total number of opens.
Split the list evenly. I think there were 400 in the English group and 400 with the Spanish headline.
Interesting.
And it didn't matter whether the
right.
headline was in English or in Spanish. They received almost identical numbers.
So in that case, yeah, whatever led to that. I mean, if that's like the top headline, people are always going to click on the top headline if they're bilingual, I guess. Yeah. I mean, that's interesting. So in that case, the language didn't have any effect, but could it have been written differently? That would be interesting.
We didn't test, wording of headlines, but
no, but the fact that you did that is fantastic. I mean, that's an actual case study so which paper was that for again?
That was for
Lavas, yeah. Okay, perfect. Yeah. So the newsletter is clearly one. It takes a little bit of setup, not that much more. You just have to duplicate your newsletter and rewrite a couple headlines in it. And they didn't really come up with any guidelines on how to create your A/B tests or, what types of words to use. I mean, they studied that. They studied things like this is why and here's how and those kinds of phrases, but they didn't find any correlation. It just turns out that every time you just need to test early and then put the winner in place. And in the case of that, Terry, I think it's a 50-50 shot. You could choose anyone to leave on the website,
Exactly.
It doesn't matter.
One thing that's really super important, and I think most publishers are aware of it, it's worth repeating, is know your audience, know your community. What headlines are going to appeal to your readers. Stick with that. Stick with the tried, true, and improved.
I think this is not something that a lot of our customers are doing right now, but we can encourage them to do it through the newsletter. And let's try to just leave this and get it on a to-do list. I mean, there's a lot of things to think about as I, start to describe the product.
So I'm almost thinking, would you have more clicks if the related article was named differently than you know what I'm saying? If it was
right. We could test this in related articles. That's interesting. Yeah. Rather than on the homepage, testing it in the related stories feature. I think that'd be something we'd also want to do. That's a great idea. All right. So let's switch it over to the next story. What's your next article from this week? Yeah. You want to talk about that venture hedge funds story? Yeah. Let's just give it a listen.
The dangers vulture hedge funds pose to newspapers. This episode of Today in News Tech is made possible with audio articles by ourhometown.com. Today, we're highlighting a piece by Rachel Treisman over at NPR about one of the biggest threats that local news outlets are facing. The article, When This Hedge Fund Buys Local Newspapers, Democracy Suffers, discusses an article from The Atlantic detailing a strategy being implemented by Alden Global Capital that is impacting newspapers across the country. A spokesperson from the firm took issue with the reporter and his sources but failed to address the actual claims made in the piece. There isn't really anything that can fill the hole these newspapers will leave if they're shut down, said The Atlantic's McKay Coppins. Here are a few of our big takeaways. Research has found that without robust local journalism holding people in power accountable, corruption and city budgets tend to increase while civil engagement and voter turnout falls. The strategy implemented by Alden Global Capital, which Coppins calls a vulture hedge fund, involves absorbing faltering publications and maximizing profits to appease shareholders as quickly as possible without the goal of running a sustainable business. This profit-driven strategy involves drastically reducing newsrooms' resources like office space and cutting staff using buyouts, leaving the remaining reporters with an unsustainable workload. While it's true that many smaller papers are struggling to find a foothold in an increasingly digital news environment, these problems aren't being helped by eliminating what little chance they did have at finding a sustainable model. Because of this, our hometown provides a wide range of full-service digital publishing resources so that papers of any size or technical ability can easily deliver news to their community.
You read the full article. Share with us like anything you have to add.
This is a pretty good summary of it. I didn't actually read this whole article as kind of condensed version of a much larger story in the Atlantic.
Yes, I just feel like this first takeaway is something that we covered in a recent story.
Yes.
That showed in a very predictable way the fines, the number of fines for local corporations and the size of the fines went up after the newspaper went out of business.
Right.
It's so interesting, a constant trend. So people in power, they're talking about in the government and in big business on the local level. Alden Capital, they're in the news a lot. Some of the things I've heard that they do is they will kind of regionalize the local newspaper. So they actually don't often even have an office there anymore, so that's the third point, but they kind of hollow things out and make it more regional. So they'll take news from the closest daily in the closest metro area and put it in the local newspaper, just to keep the page count up. We don't see this though at our publishers. That's the thing, that we can't really relate to this because, these huge chains that have been bought out by venture capital, they're not like really the independent mom and pops that we work with. That's been great to work with them because we haven't really seen this effect. They haven't been pushed into this, but yeah, it's just kind of hollowing out the product. They're trying to keep the ads in there. They're trying to keep the page count up, but it's not really covering the local stories in as much depth as they once did when they actually had people in the community. So they're cutting staff, using buyouts. They're just running it like a business. And I guess, they come into it, they're buying it, and they don't see a future in these companies. So they're kind of just pulling out all the profit that they can.
The way the article described it, it's almost like they're just buying these things to create perceived value so that they can say that these are our holdings, and they don't really care about what the holdings are doing
or what the long-term future is. But today, they own these media properties, but they've all been regionalized. They're not really supporting local advertising anymore anyway. It's probably getting more regional as well, and even more national. So that's just kind of an industry trend to keep an eye out for. These venture funds, there was a ton of venture funding around. When I started at the company 12 years ago in tech, there was also a lot of newspapers being bought by these companies. And now we're kind of seeing the downstream effects of that. So
we've also seen Gannett, I believe, sold a few papers back.
Yeah, they're not exactly venture capital, but they were kind of
swallowing up papers for a while. And it was under the guise of and maybe guise is a bad word. They were supporting local newspapers. So they were kind of holding them over for a time. And that was helpful. But still, one of the first things that was done was downsizing staff, office space, and content. I think this article kind of preaches to the choir. I think most publishers are really aware of the threat.
Sure.
Doing everything they can to hang on.
What can you really say more than that? Everyone does know this is happening. This has kind of happened in a lot of different industries.
It's good for our publishers to know, though, that we support them. I don't think it's always worth repeating that we support our publishers. That's our main focus, is to keep them publishing.
What you pointed out about Gannett selling back the papers, they're kind of like the venture capital funds in the sense that they're so large, but they are a media organization. So they're probably not as extreme in the vulture side.
Right. You don't have a sportswear company buying newspapers. Yeah.
When it gets to the corporate level, you don't have that local connection. So I think they share that in common, but the fact that they are being sold back to local owners is definitely a good sign for the industry. And, one of our customers are buying up papers like crazy. So it does seem to be swinging in the other direction. When I came in 12 years ago, you heard a lot about venture capital buying groups. It was much more news about that than about the other directions. Great article. We'll have a reaction video to that next week. What else we got?
The innovation article.
Okay. Yes, I did skim this one. Let's hear it.
How newspapers define and implement innovation. This episode of Today in News Tech is made possible with audio articles by ourhometown.com. Today, we're highlighting a piece by Damian Ratcliffe over at What's New in Publishing about the ways various media organizations approach making innovations in their workflow and technology. The article, What Do We Mean by Innovation? And why is implementing it so darned hard for news organizations? Discusses interviews conducted with 10 experts across the media landscape about their philosophies towards innovating within the industry. The experts discuss the lessons they've learned from successes and failures, as well as gave advice about the biggest barriers to implementing change. The pace of change in our industry means that even the biggest, most successful companies need to continually innovate, refresh, and reinvent what they do and how they do it, said Damian Radcliffe. Here are a few of our big takeaways. When trying to innovate, make sure to keep your goal in mind. Are you trying to improve the way you gather news, how you package it, or the way it's distributed and monetized? Before pursuing an innovation, make sure that both your newsroom and your audience are ready for it. You should also make sure you have both the staffing and fiscal resources to pursue it. Remember that innovation doesn't have to be flashy. A new CMS might not be as exciting as a website redesign, but if it helps your workflow, it might be more beneficial. No matter what changes you make, it's important to keep things fresh and constantly reevaluate both your paper's technology and processes to avoid becoming stagnant. Because of this, our hometown designed our WordPress platform so that new features and design elements can quickly and easily be added as papers assess their needs.
They're not really too specific in this, but as I listened to it the second time, I thought of a bunch of great examples of innovations that are out there that people aren't maybe taking advantage of, and why aren't they doing that? I think it's just a question we have to constantly be asking ourselves as providers of a platform. Did you have anything to add to the takeaways, Tyler, on this?
I think the actual article is worth looking at.
Okay.
If you're actually trying to find more ways to innovate, because it has like a 9-point plan, like a checklist of here's how you like come up with a thing that needs changed. Here's how you figure out what changes to make and that kind of thing, which I tried to squeeze into as small a package as possible just because a lot of it kind of seemed extraneous. Let's
look at this first point here. When trying to innovate, keep the goal in mind. I do think they make a lot of good points here about just how to look at it and not get caught up in the wrong things. You don't do something just for the sake of doing it. There's got to be like a real clear time saving or something. So like improving the way you gather news, for example, reverse publishing would be the first thing that comes to my mind on that. Just in terms of that's a big time savings. It makes you more digital centric. It allows you to be daily. It allows you to check all these goals that we're constantly talking about. The minimum in the digital age, even for a weekly newspaper, it needs to be daily.
Yep. Email to post would be another one.
Exactly. So the goal being getting stories up on the web as quickly as possible and as easy as possible. Google Docs add-on, reverse publishing just kind of sets up the whole workflow for this. It doesn't specifically, get the stories out there quicker, but it just sets you up for that. How to package it, also video and audio content. The goal being getting people content in the format that they prefer to consume it.
I would also add newsletters to that list, which is a thing I think a lot of people are still overlooking somehow.
Take advantage of every option: email, Facebook, print, online, video, just hit them all.
Yes, let's talk about this though, because it's like the innovation doesn't have to be flashy. So you don't want to just necessarily be on TikTok because it's the latest app. We want to think about where the audience is and what is the most sustainable thing. Like email newsletters is just repurposing articles that are on the website into an email. That's clearly something that you would want to do. Facebook, only if it can be automated. I mean, really, if you're manually posting Facebook links, the cost benefit analysis, it depends on the size of your audience on Facebook. I couldn't say across the board that's a good idea, but I would say yes, across the board, an automated publishing solution from the website to Facebook is a good idea. I subscribe to the News and Review and I tested this theory for myself. And on my personal news feed, we're putting out a dozen articles on Tuesday. I'm only seeing one article every 30 stories or something. They really do space it out on the personal news feed. There's really no reason not just put it all out there as soon as possible. And for many of our full service customers, that's when we extract the PDF and put all the stories up in HTML.
Also go a little broader regarding the platform. You don't have to redesign your website for there to be a benefit to switching to like a WordPress platform where you can do everything in one backend. Just because your website looks fine doesn't mean that your backend can't be improved. And that might be more beneficial.
Right. And many providers, including our hometown, could just take any template that you give us and basically mock it up on WordPress. You got to look at the whole picture. The website is one piece of the puzzle. And it could be part of the print workflow puzzle, but it's definitely central to digital, obviously. I think those are some real tangible take-home points for small publishers. Some people, I think, kind of jumped into just doing video right away because everyone was doing video. They didn't really have a goal in mind and they didn't have a strategy behind it. And so those things kind of fall off quickly. But you look at like Pleasanton Express, they're pretty consistent about it. It seems to be that their goal is to just cover like all sports. There, it makes sense to invest your newsroom resources into that.
I love that second point. Before pursuing an innovation, make sure both your newsroom and your audience are ready for it. I would also add to that, don't underestimate your newsroom and your audience because they may be more ready than you realize.
This is good. Yes. Thank you for bringing us back to this. How could a local newspaper find this out? Talking to your newsroom is one thing. Let's focus on the audience. How could they find out if an audience is ready for a podcast? What are some specific things they could do? I have a couple ideas. I'm thinking like a poll, just run a poll on the website.
How about focus groups?
That would be definitely the next level and you'd get a lot more out of that. I think that we want to come up with a whole list of things like that's the most involved. But yeah, that's something that could be done virtually probably. So Kevin Slim talks about that, right, Vera? That's his big thing. I don't know right now.
Right.
I think they would give the attendees something. What would that actually look like? They would like give them lunch or something and come in and look at the paper and ask them a questionnaire about it, basically.
That's right. And any suggestions and improvements that they would make.
So that you could knock off a ton of stuff with a survey like this. You could ask about podcasting, interest in video, interest in more category specific newsletters, all kinds of stuff. What's the simplest way to get started? If you're thinking about doing a podcast, run a poll on your website or maybe run a newsletter and just see if you can get some feedback that way.
Right. And I think the poll shouldn't be something that says, if we offered a podcast, would you listen to it? It should be something that's more like, how often do you listen to podcasts?
That's right. They're probably more honest. I mean, it's asking about what they do now, not about what might
current
do.
Behavior, current interests.
And past behavior is the best predictor of future. So you would I think you can even be more specific. How many hours have you listened to a podcast in the last month? I recently took a survey to try to get into a beta test for a New York Times audio app, and they were asking me this exact type of stuff. If there's some way we could ask these questions of people.
Right, and even ask your newsroom.
Ask the newsroom. Absolutely. I just had this cool idea though.
How often does your staff listen to podcasts? When do they listen to podcasts?
They're going to be more newsy than the average person. We got to keep that in mind. We kind of talked about that a few weeks ago.
Right. But it's also an indicator of whether or not they're ready for.
Just trying to assess the adoption of podcasts in your community. Yes. And you could ask them much more detailed questions, right? I would like to discuss the French Facebook story. And this is today's article. Chris just published the video, so we'll watch this and then discuss. Today in News Tech, Facebook makes deal with French publishers to pay for links to news stories. According to APnews.com, Facebook has struck a deal with a group of 300 French publishers to, quote, pay for links to news stories that are shared by people on the social network. Financial terms were not disclosed. The licensing agreement, known as Neighboring Rights, is part of the Facebook Journalism Project. According to the announcement, the agreement means that, quote, people on Facebook will be able to continue uploading and sharing news stories freely amongst their communities, whilst also ensuring that the copyright of our publishing partners is protected. Many authorities across Europe are pushing to force Facebook and other social media companies to pay publishers for content on their platform. Facebook's product is the newsfeed, and as we've recently reported, 30% of U.S. adults access their news on Facebook. The company knows that much of its value comes from these links. Even just the headline, featured image, and teaser are valuable content. Facebook also announced the launch of a French version of Facebook News in January. According to the post on the Facebook Journalism Project page, the goal is to give people a dedicated space to access content from trusted and reputable news sources. This brings up two big questions in our minds. How will this affect small newspaper publishers in France? And could this serve as a model for legislation in the U.S.? Leave us your thoughts in the comments below. This is the latest. Anyone hear this already? Did you guys see this headline by any chance before hearing it today?
I think I'd seen it somewhere in the last day or so.
Okay.
Yeah, I saw a reference, but I didn't go into it.
So it's Europe that's kind of leading, Australia, specifically France, I think just more anti-big tech than the rest of Europe. I don't know. It's going to be interesting how it falls out there, but I think it's going to start there. At first, I thought, is this going to be just paying for the links in the new Facebook news page? But no, it's literally if I, as a user on Facebook, share a news article and it shows up on my friend's feed, that will lead to them getting paid for that. As I said in the video, the product is the news feed. Ads are right above and below these articles. People are looking at the articles. That's why they're there. And they're seeing these sponsored posts, which we do, by the way. And we take advantage of Facebook advertising because it is very effective. You know, you're right in line with the content that they're kind of subscribed to based on their history or the things that they've liked.
Definitely worth watching.
I just have a few questions about what it means for Facebook as a business, because a lot of the legal protections Facebook has is because it is a platform where people post their own content. And this almost puts Facebook in the role of a publisher.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that really changes their responsibility in what's going on to the website.
I think it just brings it more to light. I mean, really, as we keep saying, they've always really been a publisher. They've kind of tried to put themselves in their own category. They've really invented the term platform. I mean, that was not a term that people use. We call ourselves Our Hometown WordPress platform because it's the same kind of concept there, but theirs is completely different. They've had a different model from the beginning. It's been free for the users. They don't fit into any of the normal boxes right now. This is why they're resisting it. I'm sure it is going to make them look more and more like a publisher. They're not really deciding what goes up there, but they're making money off of it. And then they're treating these news organizations as stringers, kind of, or like freelancers. They'll give them a cut. It's interesting. I mean, I've thought about that type of a model for a newspaper. Would there be some way to look at the statistics of an article and, automatically give bonuses to certain writers or authors at the paper, the ones that are the most popular, just to kind of align those interests? But I have no idea how this is going to play out, what kind of timeline we're looking at, but I thought it was interesting and worth watching. Thanks for watching Today in News Tech, the podcast covering innovation in digital journalism. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and subscribe on YouTube or any of your favorite podcast apps. We'll see you tomorrow.
At Our Hometown, we help newspapers build WordPress websites, design native apps, and develop digital subscription models. If you are interested in a free prototype of your publication on WordPress, go to ourhometown.com and click the Contact